In today's video, we hop back into our NHL offseason plan series. Today, we're looking at the 19th ranked team from the regular season, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They made some bold moves last offseason, trying to continue to contend while their great stars like Malkin and Crosby were still playing strong. It did not work out. What changes should we expect this offseason? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're analyzing the offseason for the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins finished 19th overall in the NHL last year. Certainly not where they want it to be. A bit of a disappointing season to say the least. We saw a lot of change last offseason, including a whole new general manager, a bold trade in Erik Karlsson, and things really, for the most part, didn't work out as expected. I mean, it certainly wasn't horrible. It could have been worse, but they didn't get into the playoffs and certainly did not have the success that they were hoping. So we're going to analyze now what comes next. Before we do that, though, we're going to first recap some team and individual stats from last season, take a look at some changes that already transpired throughout the campaign, look at their cap situation, expiring contracts, which will kind of help us answer those questions on what needs to change and what should we expect from them this summer. First up, let's start with recapping last year. They had 88 points in the campaign with a record of 38, 32, and 12. Ultimately, a little bit short of making the playoffs. The power play with Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, Karlsson, etc. was atrocious. 30th best in the league, only 15.3% success rate. That is a clear big problem. Certainly when you have that kind of talent, there's really no good excuse. So certainly they need to make some changes to make that more respectable. First and foremost, the penalty kill was actually pretty respectable at 80.7%. It was number 10 in the league. So they had a top 10 PK, but almost worst power play, which is not what you'd expect. You'd almost expect if you had to pick which one was the better one, you would think the power play. That's not how things played out last year. Goals for was 253 for 19th best. Goals against 248 for 13th best. So surprisingly, in a turn of events, the defensive statistics were stronger than the offensive ones for Pittsburgh, especially with a goaltending tandem that, especially with Tristan Jarry being the starter, didn't have the greatest campaign. And really, for the most part, some of their decor struggling. It's surprising to look at the numbers and really analyze things. But goal scoring, which has typically not been an issue in the past, was this past year, and especially on the power play when Pittsburgh's always had, not always, but a large part of the Crosby era at least, a very solid one. Looking at their individual top performers, again, the ageless wonder Sidney Crosby continues to put up crazy numbers at a later age. Obviously, 94 points last year. Not only was he the team's leading scorer, he's one of the tops in the league. Certainly, I think his season would have gotten more attention and more accolades if it wasn't for some ridiculously strong seasons from guys like Kucherov and McKinnon. Of course, McDavid right in that conversation too. But 94 points for Sidney Crosby at his current age and stage of his career is absolutely phenomenal. He's not slowing down in the least. Malkin had a strong season as well, not to the level Crosby did, but at least he was healthier this past year. Put up 67 points, but still, I think it would be fair to say the Penguins were hoping for a little bit more out of him, but I think it's fair to say Crosby's definitely aged better than Malkin has. Malkin's dealt with a lot more injuries. Rust had a decent season. Rust scored 28 goals, 28 assists for 56 points. Erik Karlsson, a good year by most offensive D-man standards, but not based on the 100-point season he had prior to being traded to Pittsburgh. He had 56 points last year. Michael Bunting, who was acquired partway through the season from the Hurricanes and the Jake Gensel deal, had 55 points and looks to be, somebody who can be, a top 6 contributor moving forward. Like I said, goaltending wasn't the absolute worst, but it certainly could be better. Tristan Jarry, after re-upping on a new contract, which was a bit surprising. I think what happened was a lot of people suspected Jarry could have maybe left last year as a free agent. I think Dubas explored the market, didn't like what he's seen, at least not for what it was going to cost, and came back to Jerry, who had finished the year with a 19-25-5 record. So even though the team had an above 500 record, Jerry's was a fair bit under. He had a 291 goals against and a 903 save percentage. And surprisingly, 903 is actually not horrific across league standards, and where things have been, a lot of teams below them would have loved to have a 903 save percentage from their starting goaltender, but it wasn't quite strong enough. Alex Nedeljkovic had a much better record, 18-7-7, but his numbers were not any better. He had a 297, slightly above Jerry, and a 902, a smidge below. So at the end of the day, I think the Penguins just seemed to play better in front of Ned for some reason. But at the end of the day, Jerry had the bulk of the starts, and just, like I said, it's not the biggest problem they have, but it is something that they definitely want to look at. And if they can get stronger goaltending, they would love to do so. Throughout the season, we did see change. We saw a couple of, one real, significant trade. The biggest part of the season, as far as change goes, was trading longtime Penguin and top goal scorer Jake Gensel in a significant trade to the Carolina Hurricanes, where they acquired Michael Bunting, as well as 3 prospects and a couple of picks. For the most part, I didn't think the trade was too bad, but the Carolina Hurricanes got themselves a real good player, and they didn't give up anybody that they considered a top 3 prospect in their system. And the Hurricanes, even though they've been a strong team, they do have a pretty good looking prospect system, in my opinion. And some of those names you thought for sure were going to be included were not. They also had a trade where they sent Alex Nylander to Columbus for Emil Bemstrom, and then Alex Nylander went on an absolute tear after the trade on the other side, of course. So that didn't look good, but could you have really predicted that? I mean, Alex Nylander's been an up and down AHL to the NHL and back and forth guy his entire career, and has only had little flashes here and there of NHL offense, whereas he just went on a tear. Can he duplicate that? Can he continue it? We'll see. I think Columbus hopes he can, but for the most part, it was surprising for sure. But that trade didn't look good. They did move Will Butcher as well to the Minnesota Wild earlier in the year, and they moved Rem Pitlick to Chicago, just trying to get guys another opportunity somewhere else with more playing time, since they weren't really fitting into their plans there. They had also traded Chad Ruhwedel to the Rangers for a 4th-round pick at the deadline, and they had moved Magnus Hellberg to Florida as well. So certainly, like I said, besides the Gensel trade, nothing earth-shattering. For the most part, just trying to move a couple of guys that likely weren't coming back, or guys that just weren't figuring into their plans. Beyond the year, seeing if they could get them more of an opportunity while gathering some sort of asset coming back. But the Gensel trade was one that was, pretty significant. Certainly, I wouldn't say it sent shockwaves, because I think we kind of seen it coming, but it was the most significant change to that forward group in quite some time. Cap-wise, they don't have a ton of space going into the offseason. They have $12.9 million in space, and they have 16 contracts right now already signed for next year or beyond. Looking at their restricted and unrestricted free agents, there's not a lot of guys out there. On the RFA side, they only have Pierre-Olivier Joseph and Emil Bemstrom. I would think there's a pretty good chance both guys could be offered a qualifying offer, but Joseph, he's been rumored to be moved for a couple of years, so I don't really know for sure how their feelings are on these 2 RFAs. Won't be shocked if they're back. I also wouldn't be shocked if they weren't. On the UFA side, they get Jansen Harkins and Alex Nedeljkovic. Harkins probably isn't back. He was a waiver pickup. Nedeljkovic, on the other hand, there's a debate. We don't know. Right now, it seems like, based on comments from Kyle Dubas, that it seems like Nedeljkovic won't be back, but you kind of have to wonder. There's been some rumblings, which we'll get into here in the next segment. Of course, like most teams, the 2024 draft is going to be an interesting time. For Pittsburgh, it's not going to be so much about who they're picking, but will we see any significant trades, or will they try to move a player to get back to the first round? Will they consummate a big hockey trade with another club? Because it seems to be a time when a lot of trade chatter goes from just talk to action, and you see a lot more trades. They only have 5 picks in the draft. They don't have a 1st-round pick, a 3rd-round pick, or a 5th-round pick. So not a lot of picks there for Pittsburgh this year. So they won't be adding too much to the prospect pool unless they move some players to gain picks in the 1st or 2nd round, which it's debatable if that will happen. The top questions that we're going to likely see them address this offseason, well, they do need to address goaltending, as I mentioned. Tristan Jarry, it's difficult to say. I mean, he did sign a multi-year deal. He's under contract for a few more years. So was he the biggest problem on that team statistically? No, he wasn't. But would you like to have better stats under your starting goaltender? You absolutely would. So between him and Nedeljkovic was, in my opinion, got the better results, but stats-wise, not drastically different. But can he really bring Nedeljkovic back? Nedeljkovic is likely going to be looking for more of a role, more money. They don't have a ton of space available, so it's debatable. Like the general consensus after they had their end-of-season media availability, kind of were left with the feeling that he probably would be let walk. So we'll have to see. Obviously, at this point, it is possible they could trade Jarry. There are teams out there looking for goaltending, and as much as Jarry might not have had a great season in Pittsburgh, for some teams he would be an upgrade. So it's kind of debatable on what they do. Do I expect a Jarry Nedeljkovic tandem to return next year? No, I don't. But I do think that at least one of them will be back. If they trade Jarry, I wouldn't be shocked that they give Nedeljkovic a chance to run with the starting netminder duty and bring in another guy who's more of a backup or a 1B. Will that be easy to do? No, but I'm sure Kyle Dubas at this point will explore, knowing how many teams out there are certainly looking for goaltending upgrades. So we'll see what they do, but I do expect some change. But I'm not sure that it's their biggest, most pressing concern. But it'll be on the list of things for him to address, no doubt. Of course, like I said, with Jake Gensel gone, how do they replace those goals? Jake Gensel obviously missed a chunk of the year with injury. But even with him there, part of the year, they still struggled to score and had one of the league's worst power plays. So clearly, bunting can be part of that solution. But how do they increase their scoring without Gensel? It's not going to be easy at all in a limited amount of cap space. So clearly, they've got they don't have a lot of money they can use to go bring in another top player, unless money goes out, and that's not going to be easy to do. I do expect them to explore the UFA market. They don't have a lot of tradable assets that's going to bring them a big return. One that they do have that I do kind of wonder, and I wondered more before, but I wonder to me where Erik Karlsson come in. Is there any chance they look to move him after 1 year? My gut instinct towards the end of the year was saying that they very well could, but then we heard that at the end of season stuff that Letang was dealing with an injury and they weren't sure if he was going to need a surgery and all that. I don't know where things stand with Chris Letang and his health. If there's any uncertainty that he's going to not be ready to start the season, then imagine without Letang and Karlsson. They already struggled to score and have a good power play last year. You take that out of the mix, you're really in a bad predicament. So I think they would maybe consider it if they knew for sure where things sat with Letang and if he was going to be there. Because Karlsson is one of those players. They've already got a bit of a lower salary from the money that San Jose's retained. If they retained a little bit more, they probably could get a good return, and then they can maybe add multiple pieces. Depending on what they want, maybe they get a defenseman and a forward in a package for Karlsson. That's certainly a reasonable expectation. Hard to say. I couldn't help but wonder, and I don't know for sure that they would even entertain this, but would they talk to Toronto about Mitch Marner? We know Kyle Dubas knows Marner very well. Obviously helped him get that current contract that's coming up for renewal. That is obviously a bone of contention with a lot of people in Toronto, thinking that's going to be the reason why he's moved, because he hasn't performed in the playoffs. He's paid a ton of money. He's going to want the same or probably more money on the next one, and hasn't gotten the job done to get him over the hump in the playoffs. If Pittsburgh wanted to even talk to Toronto about Mitch Marner, and I don't know for sure that they will, but if they did, it's going to take something significant to make them want to do that. So I would think a player like Karlsson would get their attention. Would Karlsson be a good option to add alongside Morgan Rielly on the blue line? I think Leaf fans could probably get behind that. I have no reason to think these teams are having those conversations, or I'm not sure what the likelihood of them even broaching the topic is. But to me, if I'm Kyle Dubas, I think I'm probably at least going to inquire with my own club to see what Marner's availability is. I mean, obviously we know that Marner is the type of player that Dubas believes in. You can say what you want about what has or hasn't worked in Toronto. We know what Dubas's philosophy is and how he feels about analytics and how he feels about skill and all that. Like, I don't think his philosophies have really changed a lot since leaving Toronto. So at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if he got in the mix trying to see if he could bring Marner to Pittsburgh. We'll have to wait and see on that. But it would take a player like Karlsson if they want to make it happen. And I just don't know if that, Karlsson's a fair bit older than Marner. Does Toronto really do that? That's a tough one. I don't really know that that's reasonable, but it's something I would explore if I was Dubas. Also on the back end, Ryan Graves struggled mightily. I'm sure he was probably somebody that was maybe recommended by Crosby, both Nova Scotian guys. I know that they do there's a Nova Scotia group of NHL guys that train a lot together. So I wouldn't be surprised if Crosby had put in a good word, a recommendation for him to be considered to come to Pittsburgh, and it hasn't worked out. Now, doesn't mean it can't work out, but Graves had a down year, so they have to figure out how to make him better, how to help him be more successful. Certainly, like I said, with the health of Letang is questionable, and all that's going to factor into, like, can you really move Karlsson with those big question marks there? Marcus Pettersson, his name has been in and out of trade rumors for the past few years, so you got to wonder what things are in store for the blue line. I wouldn't be shocked to see some change, possibly even some significant change for sure. There's been some rumors and speculation about the head coach, Mike Sullivan, and Kyle Dubas having some tension and not agreeing on a lot of player personnel moves and whatnot. I don't know that we can really quantify that. But at the same time, I think if a coaching change was going to happen, it would have happened by now. Sullivan was recently named head coach for Team USA for the upcoming Four Nation Face-Off tournament coming up next year. Long history with dealing with a lot of star players. There's a lot of great success, Stanley Cup. So certainly, I know Dubas made it clear when he first came to Pittsburgh last year that somebody who he had a great respect for and had no intention of making changes with. But, like I said, over time, Dubas is not the one who brought Sullivan to Pittsburgh. Probably isn't the level of loyalty that there would be if it was somebody he hired. But again, like I said, I think when Sullivan dealt with the ownership change with Fenway Group, and then of course with Dubas coming in as GM after, I think he's pretty well respected within the ownership group, and he has a lot of autonomy there and a good long-term deal. So I don't know that there's really a lot of truth to the stuff of him leaving, but could there be disagreements and personnel changes? Sure. Another frustrating year in Pittsburgh, and maybe we see change, but I'm not sure that's going to lead to anything this year. But I know it's a question that I think the team probably doesn't need to have, actually addressed publicly, but, will that relationship thrive or will it sour as the year goes on? Only time will tell. And you know what? Winning solves everything. So we'll see. And of course, another big one this offseason is going to be Sidney Crosby. Now, we're not expecting Crosby to be moved or anything of that nature, but it's, will he do an extension? He's going to be eligible for the first time in a long time for him to do a contract extension. He's going into the final year of his deal. So on July 1, he can extend. Many expect Crosby to most likely be a lifelong Penguin and, finish out his career there. Will that take place? Was this past year, even though it was, out of the playoffs and frustrating, is that enough to change his mind, or does he still believe in what they're doing there? And is it more important to him to finish things out there? And there was always been talk for a long time that he would love to play a year in Montreal before it's all said and done. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it was his childhood team. I know his dad was drafted by the Habs, never really made it to the NHL and played, but he was a Habs draft pick all those years ago. So I think there's, some degree of interest, but would Crosby, after everything he's been through in Pittsburgh, really want to leave? I don't think so. I think his first preference would be to remain and finish things out in Pittsburgh, but I think at the same time, Crosby is one of the most competitive people who ever play the game, one of the most competitive people you're ever going to meet. And I just think that he really wants to win. And I just wonder if they can't get things turned around to the point where they feel like they've opened a window back up to win again, is he going to want to go somewhere else to try to add another Stanley Cup before it's all said and done? Does he have any interest to go to Montreal like the rumors have suggested for the past 3 or 4 years? Would he have any interest in joining his good buddy Nate McKinnon in Colorado for a 1-year run? Like, things like that you've heard about. You can't really quantify them. They've never really been, he's never going to verify that publicly if he's even had those thoughts. Because to be honest, I'm not sure he's ever had any serious thoughts about anything besides being a Penguin. But whether or not he signs an extension or what it looks like is going to be a big question this team has to face this offseason. I don't see him bailing because at this point he obviously lobbied for his good buddies and teammates for long-term Malkin and Letang to both get extended last year. They did. They're both there now for multiple years moving forward. Can you see Crosby kind of bailing on that and saying, yeah, you know what, I know I really lobbied for you guys to stay, and it was a frustrating year, so I'm out. I just don't see that happening at all. So I think more than likely Crosby signs an extension. I'm going to say probably at least 2, maybe 3 years, somewhere is upwards of at least $8, if not $10 million. So he's well worth it. To me, he's been underpaid for a large part of his career after signing that mega long-term deal at $8.7 million per season. So obviously he's, signed a contract that was due to his number, and at the time, it was probably good in the first part of it, but like I said, well underpaid for a large chunk of it. So that's something that's on Dubas' agenda this year as well. So will Crosby extend? Could they trade Karlsson? How do they fix that blue line, make it a little bit more efficient? But more than anything, how do they fix the blue line to contribute more to the offense? And at the same time, like, how do they get more scoring without Jake Gensel? I don't really think there's a chance Gensel's going back. So how do they replace that? This team needs to add, a top 6 forward, in my opinion, for sure. And they may have to do that through free agency or trade, because there's not much coming in the way of young guys that can step in and provide that. So let me know what you expect from the Penguins this offseason. Is the Karlsson trade a possibility? Is he there for the long haul? Are they going to basically run it back and try to make a few tweaks? Let me know what you think down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.